The man suddenly woke up to the sound of the waves to find himself floating in the middle of the ocean. He started working hard trying to find a way out or any sign of survival. The movie opens with a half-sunken cargo container drifting slowly across the Indian Ocean. In a voiceover, a man says that it is currently the 13th of July, 4:50 p.m. He apologizes to someone, admitting that he tried to be true and strong, but failed miserably. The man then claims that he was wrong all along, and it took him this long to admit it, realizing that he will die soon. He says goodbye to his family and expresses his love for them. The scene then shifts to 8 days before the tragic event, where we see an old man sleeping soundly in his ship. Moments later, he awakens to unusual noises and sees the floor is flooded with water. He rushes to the deck and discovers that his ship collided with a drifting container, allowing a large amount of water to enter through a hole. Panicked, the man tries to use a stick to separate his ship from the container, but it doesn't work. He then goes below deck and discovers that all of his equipment, including phones, computers, and radios, is submerged in water. In a moment of desperation, the man grabs a sea anchor from the cabin and ties it to the container. This finally sends the container into the depths, freeing it from the ship. Following this, the man begins to change course but soon realizes that he has left the sea anchor behind. He manages to retrieve it and despite some difficulty, manages to haul it back onto his ship. As he sails away from the container, he notices water coming through the hole and realizes that he must act quickly. Afterward, the man goes below deck and discovers that the water has reached his waist. He examines the electronic system that automatically pumps out water. Appears to be damaged. With time running out, the man looks around carefully until he comes up with a solution. He opens a wooden toolbox containing fiberglass patch materials and starts repairing the hole. Since he has lost the lever, he uses a knife to carve a piece of wood that fits into the manual hand-bilge pump hole. He then utilizes this makeshift instrument to pump water from beneath the deck. I'd have died about 3 times by this point. Soon, night begins to fall, so the man stops his work and proceeds to eat canned food for dinner. With water everywhere, he makes a makeshift hammock and sleeps in it. The next morning, the man wakes up and is relieved to see the sunny weather. He keeps patching the hole at the side of the ship and pumping out more water. He also retrieves a wireless radio that's been damaged by water. He places it on the roof to dry, hoping that it will function. After completely pumping out the water, the man cleans the floor and checks the patched hole for any signs of weakness. He finds out that it is intact, making him very happy. He then eats canned food for dinner again, before retiring to bed. If it's not in a can, I don't want it, he says. On the 3rd day, the man gets anxious, thinking that he may be stuck here forever. He realizes that he needs to contact someone, but all modes of communication have been damaged. After some deliberation, he comes up with an idea and heads downstairs. The man removes a battery from an electronic board and opens it to connect to the radio. During this time, he also studies a map and tries to find areas where connectivity might be better. Unfortunately, his efforts are in vain, and the radio still doesn't work. Frustrated, the man goes downstairs and begins reading a book on celestial navigation. He tries to look for some ideas in it, but all he discovers is that he's a Leo and that he's supposedly going to have a bad month, and soon he hears noises from the deck. He rushes to investigate and discovers that the radio has picked up a signal. The man hears 2 people conversing in Indonesian, making him happy. He shouts at them, claiming that he's stranded and in urgent need of help. However, the conversation stops and no one answers him. This leaves the poor man feeling extremely hopeless. He goes downstairs and begins drinking to calm himself down. Later, while cooking dinner, he feels raindrops on his hand and gets excited. He steps out to the deck and begins to enjoy the rainfall. He also remembers to reserve some fresh water to drink later. After the rain stops, he goes downstairs and eats pasta for dinner. Canned pasta, I hope. He then reads the book using a headlamp and soon falls asleep. When the man wakes up on the 4th day, he goes to the deck and climbs to the top of the mast. From there, he searches the horizon for other ships, but finds none. Instead, he finds a disconnected antenna lead and proceeds to repair it. While at the top of the mast, he notices an approaching tropical storm, which could endanger both him and the ship. Feeling scared, the man quickly descends and begins preparing the ship for the storm. He fills numerous bottles and buckets with water to increase the ship's stability and keep it from capsizing. He also takes the chance to use the hand pump to remove any water that has accumulated inside the ship. After a moment of drowsiness, the man goes outside to check and notices that the storm has begun. He quickly returns below deck to put on his rain suit. As time passes, the storm intensifies, causing large waves to rise and crash against the ship. Despite the challenges, the man doesn't let his courage waver. He tries to steer the ship steadily and crawls to the front to raise the storm jib. At this moment, a massive wave hits him and throws him into the water. He is fortunately attached to the lifeline of the sail ship, which allows him to climb back on board. However, the storm jib is lost forever. Following this, the man retreats to the cabin and locks himself inside. He begins vomiting seawater and then collapses on the floor due to exhaustion. When he finally awakens, he discovers that the ship is about to capsize. He looks out the window and realizes that the storm is still not over. In desperation, the man decides to use the anchor once more, but as he's about to do so, the ship flips violently, hurling him into the water. Both he and the yacht are unharmed, but the main mast is broken, and the majority of the equipment on board is destroyed. After cutting off the damaged mast, he returns to the cabin only to discover that the fiberglass patch has started leaking again. At this point, the ship jerks violently, causing him to hit his forehead against the bulkhead and lose consciousness. Sometime later, when the man regains consciousness, he notices a large wound on his forehead. He realizes the storm has subsided slightly, but the water has flooded the majority of the cabin, rendering it irreparable. In his injured state, he moves to the deck and cuts the windward side of the ship. This prevents the ship from moving forward and provides some stability as he won't drift further. But the top portion still remains broken and water continues to flood inside. He realizes that he must leave the ship now, or else he will risk dying of hypothermia. With no other options, the man grabs the bag containing a life raft and brings it to the deck. He attaches the raft to the sail ship's railing before throwing it into the water. After bringing it close to the ship, he jumps aboard and spends the night inside. The next day, the man wakes to find that the worst of the storm has passed. Unfortunately, he realizes his sail ship is half submerged and beyond saving. Despite initial fear about the sinking ship, he returns multiple times to gather food and supplies for the raft. Just before leaving for good, he remembers something important and pulls the raft back to the ship. The man dives underwater into the cabin and retrieves a wooden box. He also takes out a first aid kit and begins treating the wound on his forehead. Once he's done, he quickly hops onto the life raft. He then watches his ship sink into the Indian Ocean, making him deeply emotional. "I lost my virginity to that ship. On that ship." Afterward, the man unlocks the wooden box and discovers a sextant and a note inside. He disregards the note without reading it and proceeds to use the sextant and navigational maps to determine his current location. The next morning, the man wakes up to find water collecting at the raft's bottom. He starts using a rag to mop it up and squeeze it out over the side. While studying the map, he notices a shipping lane a short distance away, where many ships pass by every single day. He marks the location and tries to get as close to it as possible. Later that night, another storm strikes, completely flipping the raft. The man is thrown into the water, but he unzips the cover and climbs out to pull the raft back up. He somehow gets inside in an utterly exhausted state and soon falls asleep. When the man wakes up the next morning, he reinflates his raft using a manual pump that appears to be damaged. He then takes a can of fresh water to drink, only to find it contaminated by seawater. Frustrated, he has a mental breakdown and starts cursing himself. "Oh, you flippin' hoe, Jiminy, son of a gun, you." The following day, we see him drifting alone in the middle of the ocean, eating canned food and using a sextant to navigate. To drink, he removes one side of an empty jerry can to form a bowl. The man pours salt water into it, and when it evaporates in the sun, it condenses on a bag, providing him with fresh water. I'd have died 300 times by this point. He soon maps out that he's in the shipping lane and begins to look intently at the horizon. A while later, the man finally spots a cargo ship and becomes overjoyed. He lights a flare, waves his arms, and yells for help, but no one pays attention, and the ship vanishes. The next morning, we notice that the man's condition has deteriorated. He is severely dehydrated and worn out from the scorching sun. His skin has turned red, and he has no food left to eat. At one point, he catches a fish and attempts to pull it towards himself, but suddenly, a shark appears and snatches it away from him. "Yeah, fuck you Jaws, god damn it." That night, the man wakes up to see another cargo ship passing very close by, almost directly over him. He again fires all of his remaining flares, but no one aboard the ship notices him. On the 8th day, we see that the man has become extremely weak, and it seems like he won't survive much longer. He notices the sextant, and realizes that the shipping lane has passed without him being found. The sunlight hurts his eyes, so he lies motionless on the life raft during the day, convinced he's about to die. He writes a message for his family, which we heard at the beginning of the movie. He then places the note in a jar and throws it in the water. In the following scene, the man notices what appears to be a ship in the seemingly endless ocean. It is night time, and he does not have any tools to send a signal. Lacking the strength to shout, the man decides to tear up some notebook pages and burn them in a styrofoam box. He signals for help with the fire, but once again, no one notices him, and the ship proceeds to leave. In desperation, he burns the entire notebook to make the fire bigger. Moments later, the fire intensifies and engulfs the interior of the raft. At this point, the man gives up on his life and throws himself into the sea. He sinks deeper and deeper, watching the raft burn on the surface above him. Just then, a miracle happens, when he notices a ship's hull with a searchlight approaching his burning raft. Hope rises within him, and he starts swimming towards the surface with his last ounce of strength. Moments later, he grabs a hand that is reaching out to help. After 8 days of hardship, our protagonist is finally saved.